Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, Sierra Leone's new president calls on his former rival to drop a legal challenge against the polls that saw Julius Maada Bio named as the country's new leader this week. Also, South Africa gears up for a complex corruption trial that risks seeing former President Jacob Zuma doing jail time. He and representatives from French arms manufacturer Thales will appear in court over bribes allegedly exchanged to secure a multi-billion-dollar arms contract. And a family of female authors in Gambia put pen to paper and put African girls at the heart of their stories. The Nye family says they want their young readers to have more role models with whom they can identify. But first, Sierra Leone's new president called on his one-time rival to drop a legal challenge against the election results. Julius Maada Bio was named leader on Wednesday night, beating the candidate of the former ruling party, Samura Kamara. Kamara alleges that the polls were fraudulent and that they were marred by ballot stuffing, overvoting and fiddled registers. Maada Bio won 51.81% of ballots and was sworn in directly after results were announced. Thursday was his first full day in office, our team reports.
On the outskirts of the capital, Freetown, newly elected President Julius Maada Bio parades through the streets in his armoured sedan. His presidential convoy is followed by a fleet of taxis filled with Sierra Leoneans who voted him into power. Many young supporters have turned out, supporters like Bakari, a student hoping to catch a glimpse of his new president.
When I had the result, I begin to put on my body like that as if I was dreaming. I can't believe it. This man, I believe that even if everything is not free, but I believe they will minimize it so that the least person can afford education in this country.
Further along, there's a sea of green. It's the traditional colour of the Sierra Leone People's Party that's celebrating its return to power. Party officials lead the procession. They're now tasked with creating jobs in a country with a youth unemployment rate of more than 70% and more than 2/3 of the population live below the breadline.
There has been a loud cry nationwide of the people that there is no employment, and also the educational system is very poor, and besides the justice system is not also correct. So when the people collectively put all this together, it's like they need an intervention.
24 hours in the new job, Sierra Leoneans already have high hopes for the new president.
South Africa's former president's preparing to appear in court to face over a dozen corruption charges over a suspect weapons deal with a French arms supplier. Jacob Zuma, who led South Africa between 2009 and earlier this year, is accused of taking over €250,000 worth of bribes from Thales as it pursued a contract worth over €4 billion. Opposition lawmakers have campaigned for the case to go to court, which will also see Thales facing charges on Friday. Our Aisha Ishmael tells us more.
In terms of the South African law and the South African constitution, everyone is equal before the law. And President Jacob Zuma has always said that he wants to have his day in court, and he's always maintained his innocence. But this is a very high-profile case. It involves a former state president and an internationally recognized French arms manufacturer. Of course, we know that there is a very long state witness list involving more than 200 witnesses. There are 4 million pages, court pages, documents. And so this is expected to be a long and drawn-out case. But of course, the prosecutors are not expected to call all 200 witnesses. They are going to be calling the strongest witnesses, those who will strengthen their case against former President Jacob Zuma and against the French arms manufacturer Thales. And one of those witnesses is a man called Ajay Suklal, who is expected to testify about the cozy relationship that former President Jacob Zuma had with Thales. And of course, we know that Jacob Zuma, as well as a representative of Thales, will be sitting side by side in the Durban High Court tomorrow morning, that is on Friday morning.
Well, as Aisha mentioned there, a key witness to the allegations is a former lawyer who worked for Thales, AJ Sukal. Our team caught up with the whistleblower a day before he headed to court.
We met up with him in a Pretoria hotel. The local press call him Mr. X. He is to be the main witness giving evidence against the French arms company Thales in the corruption trial set in South Africa. AJ Sukal is a lawyer. Having worked for Thales for 6 years, he says he has evidence of backhand payments from the French company to former South African President Jacob Zuma.
Hence, there are these various facets of monies being passing hands. It ran into tens of millions of rand.
Cash?
Yes. As well as the €1 million check that the Thales Group donated to the ANC in 2006.
His affidavit contains hundreds of pages. On the eve of the largest arms deal in post-apartheid South Africa, a representative of Thales promised Jacob Zuma a yearly payment of €50,000 in exchange for his favor. This will be used in the trial. But financial transactions are not only linked to the arms deals. In 2007, Zuma was invited to the Rugby World Cup semi-final by Thales director Pierre Moineau, who allegedly paid the bill.
For example, Mr. Moineau paid for hotel stays in Paris as well as clothing purchases in Paris by Mr. Zuma.
In 2008, Jacob Zuma managed to have the corruption charges dropped. According to AJ Sukal, this was a result of high-level pressure from the French authorities.
There was presidential interference in early 2008 in Paris. I accompanied Mr. Zuma. Mr. Zuma met Mr. Sarkozy at the Elysee Palace, and Mr. Sarkozy then repeated the same request that he would like the charges to be dropped.
The stakes run high for Thales. If the group loses the trial, contracts in South Africa will be declared null and void. Thales officials who we contacted refused to comment. AJ Sukal says that if he speaks, it's because he was not paid by Thales for his legal services.
8 months before Madagascar heads into presidential elections, and tensions are already rising. Opposition lawmakers are accusing the government of bribery and fraud after MPs voted in a new electoral law earlier this week. Gail Borja tells us more.
Stop corruption was the rallying cry of dozens of opposition members of parliament on Thursday as they marched in protest to the Constitutional High Court. There, they submitted complaints alleging irregularities during the vote of new electoral laws. These laws give the new conditions to be a candidate. Critics say the count-off was tampered with, that the legal procedures were not properly followed, and some protesters are accusing MPs of accepting bribes from the government to back the changes.
We've seen videos, films taken by third parties that show that there were bribes. Each person received €12,000 to back the electoral law with no amendment.
Pro-government MPs insist the vote was above board. They've hit back at critics, saying they're motivated by sour grapes. The new legislation could exclude the two former presidents, Mark Ravalomanana and André Zuma, from running for office again. NGO Transparency International has often raised its own concerns about the levels of corruption in Madagascar.
Gail Borja there for us. In a bid to get more girls on the continent enjoying stories with role models that they can identify with, one family of authors in Gambia has started penning tales of African-inspired adventures. Anne Fai, her sisters and her mother are trying to put young girls at the heart of all their books. Nicolas Chemin tells us more.
Gru is a wise elephant.
These books are about African-inspired stories. They come from a foundation run by a family of Gambian women in the diaspora. They say that too often children's books are written from a Western perspective, while their books are only about African characters.
When you read, for example, the stories of Peter and Jane, and they're talking about having a pet dog, and the dog jumps on the bed. Here in most African cultures, we don't have that experience where our dogs are not indoor dogs. But when you talk about an African story, a children's story where the dog is outside and it's running and it's chasing us, kids can relate to that.
The foundation donates books and helps to stock libraries. The children especially like the story of two mischievous friends called Samba and Batch.
I like Samba and Batch because they are best friends, like me and my best friend. These books help us to speak English and to know things.
One of the stories, called Princess Halima, is aimed at empowering young girls. In Gambia, before a ban on child marriage in 2016, 30% of girls were married before the age of 18, according to UNICEF. The foundation says its books are now increasingly being sold across the continent and worldwide, as many parents are eager for their children to discover more varied perspectives.
Well, that's it for Iron Africa for now. Thanks for joining us. Do so again. Take care.
Reporters, presented by Mark Owen.
This week, our reporters take us on a voyage to the vast sands of the Mauritanian desert. After years blighted by terrorism, Mauritania is making a comeback. Peace is returning. Tourists are trickling back. But long years marked by political instability have taken their toll on the economy. With tourism in mind, the authorities are set on restoring the fairy tale image of Mauritania's ocean of sand.
Reporters on France 24 and France24.com.